Who truly keeps a seat for you? Have you ever felt like you were studying English, but the more you studied, the more you wanted to quit? I'm asking you honestly. Not because you're lazy. Not because you're not smart. But because some days, you open your mouth and your brain just freezes. You hear Americans speak as fast as a cold Chicago wind, and inside your head there is only one quiet sentence: maybe I don't belong here. If you have ever thought that, then this story, my real story of living and working in the United States, might be the seat you've been looking for. The day I arrived in America, the weather was not the cute movie kind of cold. It was the kind of cold that slips through your jacket and asks your bones directly, "You sure you're okay?" I stood in the airport holding my suitcase, whispering to myself in very slow English, "I can do this." But honestly, I wasn't sure. The funny thing is, before coming to the US, I thought my English was decent. I could understand podcasts. I could read news articles. I even watched movies without subtitles. Or at least I thought I did. But the moment the rental office clerk spoke to me at the speed of light, my brain instantly switched to low battery mode. You know that feeling, right? When you hear every single word, but together they sound like NASA encryption. Neuroscience actually explains this. When you study English in a safe environment, like a classroom or slow videos, your brain processes language comfortably. But in real life, speed, accents, and social pressure activate the amygdala, the brain's stress center. And when the amygdala is stressed, your language processing drops. In simple terms, you're not getting dumber. Your brain is just panicking. And I panicked. A lot. During my first week in the US, I avoided speaking to strangers whenever possible. At the grocery store, I chose self-checkout. At work, I smiled more than I spoke. Some evenings, I sat alone in my small room, playing slow English listening practice on YouTube, quietly wondering, did I come here to grow, or to hide? If you are on your English listening speaking journey right now, you might be exactly at this stage. The stage where motivation starts leaking like an old phone battery. The stage where quitting crosses your mind, even if you haven't said it out loud. Here's the interesting part. My turning point did not begin with a new class. Not a magic textbook. And definitely not a cute language learning app mascot. It started with a very ordinary question. One late autumn afternoon, with yellow leaves covering the parking lot outside my workplace, an American coworker looked at me casually and asked, "Hey, what are you doing for Thanksgiving?" I froze for about 2 seconds, not because I didn't understand the question, but because I didn't have an answer. In America, Thanksgiving is not just a holiday. It's family day. It's about chairs already saved around the dinner table. It carries an unspoken question no one says directly: where do you belong? And in that moment, I realized something slightly painful. I was in the United States. I had a job. I was studying English every single day. But I wasn't sure if anyone was saving a seat for me. If you are watching this video while feeling lost in your English journey, or in life in general, stay with me. Because this story is not only about language. It's about how my very first Thanksgiving completely changed the way I see America, love, and the meaning of family. And trust me, If you are thinking about giving up on English, the next part might make you reconsider. Because sometimes, what you need is not to study harder. It's to find the right table, where a seat is still waiting for you. The first days on American soil. You can prepare for vocabulary. You can prepare for grammar. But nothing, and I mean nothing, fully prepares you for the emotional weather of your first days in the United States. Especially when your English is still finding its feet. After that quiet moment in the parking lot, my mind kept replaying the same thought, where do I belong here? But to understand why that question hit me so deeply, you need to step back with me to my earliest days living and working in America. The days when everything felt slightly too fast, slightly too cold, and slightly out of reach. My first apartment in the US was small but clean, located in a typical suburban neighborhood. The kind you often see in American lifestyle videos. Wide streets, neat lawns, and mailboxes that all look strangely similar. On the surface, it was peaceful. But inside my head, it felt like standing in the middle of a busy airport without knowing which gate to walk toward. Even the climate felt like a lesson I hadn't studied for. Back home, seasonal changes were gentle. But here in America, late autumn arrived with confidence. The air was dry. The wind had teeth. One morning, I stepped outside thinking I was dressed warmly enough. I was wrong within 30 seconds. My coworker later laughed kindly and said, "Welcome to real fall." Moments like that may sound small, but research in cross-cultural psychology shows that environmental changes, including climate differences, can significantly increase what experts call acculturative stress. Your brain is not just translating language. It is also adapting to new physical sensations, new social rules, and new daily rhythms all at the same time. In simple terms, your mental energy gets divided. And I felt that division every single day. At work, conversations moved quickly but politely, very American in style. People were friendly, but efficiency mattered. Small talk happened near the coffee machine. "How is your morning going?" "Pretty good, staying warm." I understood the words. But participating smoothly? That was another story. Here is something many English learners don't realize. Listening comprehension in real environments depends heavily on processing speed, not just vocabulary knowledge. Studies in second language acquisition consistently show that learners often know more words than they can process in real time. That gap creates the uncomfortable feeling of "I know this, but I can't keep up." That was exactly where I lived during those first weeks. So I created a small survival routine. Every evening, after work, I would sit at my small kitchen table with a cup of something warm and play slow English listening practice videos. I repeated short phrases out loud. "Nice to meet you." "That makes sense." "I appreciate it." "Nothing fancy. Nothing dramatic." But something interesting started happening. Because the story-based listening, especially real-life English stories, felt easier for my brain to hold onto than random vocabulary drills. Cognitive science explains why. When information is embedded in a narrative, the brain activates multiple memory networks at once: language processing, emotional association, and episodic memory. That combination strengthens retention. In everyday words, your brain loves stories. Still, even with practice, the emotional side of adjustment didn't magically disappear. Weekends were the hardest. During the workweek, structure kept me moving. But on quiet Saturday mornings, the silence in my apartment felt louder than any fast American conversation. I would sometimes scroll through social media and see families posting about fall gatherings, pumpkin recipes, and upcoming Thanksgiving plans. That word kept appearing. Thanksgiving. At the time, it was just a cultural concept to me, something I vaguely understood as big family dinner in America. I didn't yet realize how emotionally significant it would become in my own story. One afternoon at work, while we were organizing supplies, another co-worker casually mentioned, "Thanksgiving is coming up fast. You traveling?" Again, I smiled politely. Again, I gave a safe answer. Not this year. What I didn't say out loud was the quieter truth. I didn't have anywhere to go. If you are currently living abroad, studying abroad, or even just learning English from far away, you might recognize this feeling. It is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is very calm on the surface. You function. You work. You learn. But underneath, there is a small question that hasn't been answered yet. Where is your place here? And more importantly, who is saving a seat for you? At that point in my journey, I still believed progress in English depended mostly on discipline. More listening, more repetition, more effort. I did not yet understand that emotional connection plays a powerful role in language confidence. Research from effective neuroscience shows that positive social belonging can significantly reduce language anxiety and improve speaking fluency over time. In other words, confidence grows faster when you feel you belong somewhere. But I was about to learn that lesson in the most unexpected way. Because very soon, that simple question, "What are you doing for Thanksgiving?" was going to turn into an invitation that would quietly change the direction of my life in the United States. And trust me, I did not see it coming. The invisible wall called English. There is a moment many English learners never talk about out loud. It is not the first mistake. Not the first awkward conversation. It is the quiet moment when you realize the real problem is not vocabulary. It is confidence. During my early weeks living and working in the United States, I ran straight into what I now call the invisible wall called English. From the outside, everything looked fine. I showed up to work on time. I understood most instructions. I could answer basic questions. If someone had observed me casually, they might have said, "Your English is good." But inside my head, the experience felt very different. Conversations moved quickly, and my brain always felt half a second behind. Not lost, just chasing. If you are learning English right now, you may know exactly what I mean. You recognize the words. You understand the topic. But by the time your brain finishes processing the sentence, the conversation has already moved on. According to research in second language processing, this delay is extremely common. It is called processing lag, and it happens because your brain is doing extra work, translating, predicting, and monitoring grammar all at once. Native speakers don't consciously do this. Their brains retrieve language automatically. Learners, however, are still building that automatic pathway. and that difference creates pressure. For me, the pressure showed up in small, almost invisible ways. At team meetings, I would rehearse simple sentences in my head before speaking. Something like, "I finished the report." But by the time I felt ready to say it, the meeting had already moved to the next topic. So I stayed quiet. Not because I had nothing to contribute, but because timing in real English conversation is its own skill. Here is something important many people overlook. Speaking confidence is deeply connected to emotional safety. Studies in applied linguistics show that learners speak more fluently when they feel psychologically comfortable, even if their vocabulary level stays the same. At that stage in my journey, I was still building that comfort. One afternoon, something small but memorable happened. I was in the break room, heating up lunch in the microwave. Two co-workers were chatting nearby about holiday plans. I caught most of what they were saying: travel, family visits, turkey recipes. Then one of them turned to me suddenly and asked, "Do you usually cook for the holidays?" Simple question. Very friendly tone. My brain understood it immediately. But my mouth hesitated. In that tiny pause, maybe 1 second, maybe 2, my confidence dropped just enough for self-doubt to sneak in. I answered politely, of course. But inside, I felt that familiar frustration rising again. If you have ever experienced this, you are not alone. Neuroscientists explain that when language learners anticipate social evaluation, even mild, friendly evaluation, the brain's threat detection system can activate slightly. Not full panic. Just enough to slow retrieval speed. This is why you might speak perfectly when practicing alone, but stumble during real conversations. Your brain is not broken. It is being cautious. Still, understanding the science does not automatically remove the emotional weight. During those weeks, I noticed a quiet pattern forming. I was functioning well enough to survive daily life in America. But I was not yet fully participating. I was standing near conversations, not fully inside them. And that is a lonely place to stand. So I doubled down on practice. Every evening, I returned to my routine, slow listening, shadowing short phrases, repeating natural expressions. But this time, I made one small change that made a surprising difference. Instead of drilling random sentences, I focused almost entirely on story-based English listening, especially real-life narratives. Why? Because stories gave my brain context. Cognitive psychology research consistently shows that contextual learning reduces cognitive load. When your brain can predict meaning through narrative flow, it processes language more smoothly. That is why learning English through stories has become one of the most recommended methods in modern language education. And slowly, very slowly, something began to shift. I started catching jokes faster. I responded to small talk more naturally. My pauses became shorter. Not perfect, but better. What I did not expect was that my biggest breakthrough would not come from a study session, but from a human moment I almost missed. Because just as I was beginning to adapt, just as the invisible wall started to feel slightly thinner, that same coworker who had asked about Thanksgiving approached me again one late afternoon. This time, her tone was more direct, more intentional. And what she said next would quietly push me out of my comfortable routine and into an experience that would change not only my English journey, but my understanding of belonging in America. Looking back now, I realize something important. Sometimes the wall in front of you is not there to stop you. It is there to guide you toward the door you haven't opened yet. And mine was about to open. The unexpected Thanksgiving invitation. If you had told me a few weeks earlier that a simple holiday invitation would become one of the biggest turning points in my English journey, and honestly in my life in America, I probably would have smiled politely and changed the subject. At that time, I still believed progress came mainly from discipline, more listening, more repetition, more quiet practice after work. Life, however, had a more human lesson waiting. It happened on an ordinary afternoon near the end of my shift. The office was calm, the kind of calm that comes when everyone is mentally already halfway into the weekend. I was organizing some paperwork, focused, comfortable in my small routine. Then I heard my name. I looked up. It was the same coworker who had asked me earlier about Thanksgiving. She walked over with an easy, warm expression, very natural, very American, and said something that on the surface sounded simple. "Hey, I was wondering, do you have plans for Thanksgiving yet?" Now, here is the interesting part. By this point, my listening had improved. I caught every word clearly. No mental lag. No confusion. But the question still created a small pause inside me, not because of English, but because of what the question meant culturally. In the United States, Thanksgiving is deeply personal. According to surveys from the Pew Research Center, it consistently ranks as one of the most family-centered holidays in American life. People travel long distances. They return home. They gather around tables that often hold years, sometimes decades, of shared memory. So when someone asks about your Thanksgiving plans, they are not just making small talk. They are quietly asking about your place in the social world. I gave my honest answer. No, not this year. There was a brief silence, not awkward, just thoughtful. Then she smiled in a way that was both casual and surprisingly kind. "Well, if you'd like, you're welcome to join us." Just like that. No big speech. No dramatic music. Just a simple American invitation. But inside my chest, something shifted. If you have ever lived abroad, or even just felt out of place in a new environment, you know this feeling. It is the moment when someone unexpectedly opens a door you didn't realize you were standing in front of. My first reaction was actually hesitation. Not because I didn't want to go. Because I suddenly became very aware of all my insecurities at once. Was my English good enough for a family dinner conversation? Would I understand the jokes? Would I accidentally break some cultural rule I didn't know about? This reaction, by the way, is extremely common. Research in intercultural communication shows that language learners often experience anticipatory social anxiety before informal gatherings, especially in family-centered settings. Your brain starts running quiet risk calculations. What if I misunderstand? What if I respond too slowly? What if I don't fit in? Standing there in that office, I could feel all those questions lining up in my mind. But something else was there too. Curiosity. Because part of me, the part that had been practicing every night at that small kitchen table, knew this was exactly the kind of real-life experience that builds true language confidence. Not perfect grammar. Not isolated listening drills. Human connection. So I took a small breath and said slowly, carefully, "Thank you. I'd really like that." Her smile widened immediately. "Great. It'll be relaxed. Just family, lots of food, and don't worry, we talk fast but we're friendly." We're friendly. It was such a simple phrase. But it lowered my stress level almost instantly. And that reaction has scientific backing. Studies in affective neuroscience show that perceived social warmth reduces language anxiety and improves conversational risk-taking. In plain terms, when you feel safe, your English flows better. Over the next few days, I noticed something interesting happening inside me. My evening English practice suddenly felt more purposeful. When I listened to slow English story practice, I wasn't just studying abstract phrases anymore. I was mentally preparing for real conversations. Real laughter. Real moments around a real American Thanksgiving table. Motivation, it turns out, grows stronger when the brain can clearly imagine the upcoming social reward. Still, I would be lying if I said the nervousness disappeared completely. The closer Thanksgiving came, the more my mind started rehearsing possible scenarios. What if the dinner table conversation moved too quickly? What if I misunderstood something important? What if I sat there smiling politely while everyone else connected naturally? But beneath the nerves, something new had appeared. Hope. Because for the first time since arriving in the United States, Thanksgiving was no longer just a cultural concept I saw on social media. It was becoming personal. And I had no idea yet just how much that single invitation was about to change my understanding of language, belonging, and the quiet question that had been following me since the airport. Who truly keeps a seat for you? I was about to find out. Sitting at an unfamiliar table. Thanksgiving Day arrived more quietly than I expected. No dramatic music. No cinematic slow motion. Just a cold American afternoon and me standing in front of my closet, staring at my clothes like they were part of an exam I hadn't studied for. If you've ever been invited somewhere new, especially in another country, you know this exact moment. You're not just choosing what to wear. You're negotiating with your confidence. Too formal? You look stiff. Too casual? You look careless. Too quiet? You seem distant. Too talkative? You might sound awkward. My brain was doing all of that. In English and in emotion. Eventually, I chose something simple, took a slow breath, and drove to my coworker's home. The neighborhood looked like something from a classic American holiday movie. Soft porch lights, fallen leaves, and the faint smell of something warm cooking somewhere nearby. When the door opened, the first thing I noticed was the sound. Laughter. Not loud or overwhelming, just steady, comfortable, lived-in laughter. The kind that tells you people here know each other well. My coworker smiled warmly. "Hey, you made it, come on in." Right away, I focused on something important for English learners: tone and rhythm. Notice how natural American invitations often sound relaxed and slightly stretched. not robotic, not textbook, perfect, just human. Inside the house, the sensory details hit me all at once. Warm air, soft background music, the unmistakable smell of roasted turkey. If you are learning English through stories, moments like this are powerful because your brain attaches language to real sensory memory. Cognitive research shows this multisensory encoding significantly improves long-term retention. In simple words, when you feel the moment, you remember the language better. The living room was already full of quiet movement. Family members were talking in small groups. Someone waved from the kitchen. Another voice called out, "Dinner is almost ready." Here's where something interesting happened. A few weeks earlier, this environment would have completely overwhelmed me. Too many voices. Too many accents. Too much real-time processing. But because I had been practicing with real English story listening, my brain was starting to adapt to natural conversational flow. Not perfectly, but noticeably better. Still, I stayed observant at first, and that was intentional. One of the smartest strategies in early language immersion is what researchers call active listening participation. You don't have to speak constantly to improve. Watching body language, tone shifts, and conversational timing builds powerful subconscious learning. So I listened. I noticed how Americans often overlap slightly when speaking, not interrupting rudely, just flowing naturally. I noticed the rhythm of small talk. How was traffic? Not too bad actually. Good, good, glad you re-here. Short, efficient, friendly. Then came the moment that made my chest tighten just a little. The table. The Thanksgiving table was larger than I expected, filled with dishes arranged carefully across the surface. But what caught my attention most wasn't the food. It was the chairs. Each place was set neatly. Plates, utensils, folded napkins. And near the middle of the table, my co-worker gently gestured and said, "You can sit right here." Right here. If you remember the question that had been quietly following me since my first week in America, who is saving a seat for you? This was the moment it became real. Because someone had. And my brain, interestingly, reacted before my emotions fully caught up. Affect and language research shows that when learners feel socially included, the brain's threat response decreases. Heart rate lowers. Cognitive load drops. And spoken fluency often improves naturally without conscious effort. I didn't know the research in that exact moment, but I felt the effect. During dinner, I spoke more than I expected to. Not perfectly. Not smoothly every time. But I participated. When someone asked where I was from, I answered in full sentences. When someone passed the mashed potatoes, I managed a natural "Thank you, I appreciate it." Small wins. Very real wins. And something else began happening quietly at that table. The invisible wall I had been feeling around English started to crack. Not because my grammar suddenly improved overnight. Because the environment felt safe enough for my brain to relax. That night, between bites of turkey and gentle family conversation, I realized something important that every English learner should hear. Fluency doesn't grow fastest in isolation.
It grows in connection.
Still, I had no idea yet that one simple question later that evening, one gentle, unexpected question, was about to reach much deeper than language. It was about to touch something far more personal. And when it came, I wasn't fully prepared for how much it would stay with me. The question that changed everything. If you had walked into that Thanksgiving dinner from the outside, nothing would have looked unusual. Plates passed smoothly from hand to hand. Someone refilled drinks. Soft laughter rose and fell like background music. It was warm, comfortable, the kind of American family dinner you often see in movies. But sometimes, the smallest moments inside ordinary scenes create the biggest shifts in your life.
For me, it happened halfway through dinner.
By then, I had relaxed more than I expected. My earlier nervousness had softened into careful confidence. I was following most of the conversation. I was even jumping in occasionally with short comments. Nothing dramatic, just natural participation. And here is something important for anyone learning English through real-life immersion. Progress often feels invisible until suddenly. It doesn't. Cognitive research on language acquisition shows that fluency development is rarely linear. Instead, the brain builds micropatterns quietly in the background. Then one day, under the right emotional conditions, those patterns begin to surface more smoothly. That Thanksgiving table was becoming one of those conditions for me. I was just reaching for the cranberry sauce when my co-worker's mother, who had been watching me with kind, curious eyes all evening, leaned slightly closer and asked in a gentle voice,
"So, what do you miss most from home?" Simple sentence.
Clear pronunciation. Perfectly natural American pacing. And yet, the question landed deeper than anything that had been said all night. Because it wasn't really about vocabulary. It was about belonging. For a brief second, my brain did something interesting. It didn't freeze the way it used to during stressful conversations. Instead, it paused, not from panic, but from emotion. Neuroscience actually describes this moment well. When emotionally meaningful questions appear in conversation, the brain shifts processing priority from pure language decoding to autobiographical memory retrieval. In plain English, your brain starts searching your life, not just your dictionary. I took a slow breath. And for the first time since arriving in the United States, I answered without over-rehearsing in my head. Honestly, I think I miss the feeling of everyone already knowing me. The table grew quietly attentive, not awkward, just present. So I continued, slowly but naturally. Back home, even small things felt familiar. Here, everything is new. I'm learning a lot. But sometimes it still feels like I'm catching up. There it was. Not perfect grammar. Not advanced vocabulary. Just real communication. And something remarkable happened next. Instead of the polite nod I half expected, her expression softened even more. She reached gently for her glass, then said something that would stay with me long after the plates were cleared. That makes sense. Starting over is never easy. But you know, you're doing really well. You're doing really well. 10 simple English words. But at that moment, they carried more confidence than any textbook praise I had ever received. This reaction also aligns strongly with what psychologists call social affirmation feedback. Studies show that when language learners receive genuine, context-specific encouragement during real interaction, their speaking anxiety drops significantly in future conversations. In other words, supportive human moments literally rewire your confidence. I felt it happening in real time. My shoulders relaxed. My responses became quicker. Even my listening felt sharper. It was as if my brain had been waiting for permission to trust the environment, and that sentence quietly gave it. Dinner continued with easy conversation. At one point, someone joked about how fast everyone eats during Thanksgiving, and I actually caught the humor quickly enough to laugh at the right moment. A small but meaningful milestone for any English learner in a live group setting. But the emotional shift inside me had already begun. Because that question, "What do you miss most from home?" had gently opened a door I didn't realize was still closed. Until that night, my focus in America had been mostly practical. Improve listening. Speak more clearly. Adapt to the culture. But sitting at that table, surrounded by people who had known me for only a few hours yet were already making space for me, I started to understand something deeper. Language learning is not just mechanical. It is deeply human. And sometimes, progress accelerates the moment your nervous system realizes you are safe enough to speak here. Still, I had no idea that this Thanksgiving gathering was only the beginning. Because over the next few weeks, the connection that started at that dinner table would continue to grow in ways I never predicted. And one particular relationship, quiet at first, almost unnoticeable, was about to become a much bigger part of my American story. Looking back now, I can see the exact moment the path began to change. It wasn't when I memorized more vocabulary. It was when someone at a warm American table asked a simple, sincere question, and truly waited for my answer. Why stories train your brain better? If you had asked me months earlier what the fastest way to improve English was, I would have given you the classic answers. More vocabulary lists, more grammar drills, more listening hours. That is what most serious learners are told to do. And to be fair, those methods are not wrong. But sitting at that Thanksgiving table, feeling my confidence rise in real time, I began to notice something important that no textbook had fully explained. My biggest progress did not happen when I studied the hardest. It happened when I was emotionally engaged in a real story. And that realization quietly changed how I approached English from that point forward. Let me explain why this matters. Because if you are watching this real English story practice video to improve your listening and speaking, understanding this principle can save you months of frustration. Your brain is not designed to love isolated information. It is designed to love meaning. Neuroscientists have studied this for years. When you memorize random vocabulary, your brain primarily activates the hippocampus, the region responsible for short-term memory encoding. Useful, yes, but fragile. That is why many learners can recognize words during review but struggle to use them naturally in conversation. Stories, however, activate something much more powerful. When language appears inside a narrative, especially one with emotion, characters, and real-life context, your brain lights up across multiple networks at once. Language processing areas, emotional centers like the amygdala, and episodic memory systems. Researchers sometimes call this whole brain learning. In simple terms, stories stick. Looking back at my own journey in the United States, the evidence was obvious. During my early weeks, I spent hours repeating clean, isolated practice sentences. My progress was steady but slow. But after Thanksgiving, after real conversations, real laughter, real emotional moments, my listening speed improved faster than I expected. Why? Because my brain finally had context to attach the language to. Think about what happened at that dinner table. I didn't just hear the phrase, "You're doing really well." I felt it. I saw the speaker's expression. I connected the words to a specific moment in my life. That kind of encoding is extremely powerful. According to cognitive psychology research, emotionally tagged memories are significantly more likely to transfer into long-term retention. This is one major reason learning English through real-life stories is now widely recommended in modern language education. But here is the part most learners miss. You don't have to wait for dramatic life events to use this method. You can intentionally train your brain through story-based listening practice, exactly like what you are doing right now. After that Thanksgiving experience, I made a small but very strategic change to my nightly routine. Instead of focusing mostly on random listening clips, I prioritized slow, clear English storytelling content, especially real-life narratives about living in America, relationships, and everyday situations. And something fascinating happened. Within a few weeks, my listening fatigue decreased. My response time improved. My speaking hesitation shortened. Not magically. Not overnight. But noticeably. Second language acquisition research supports this pattern. Studies consistently show that learners exposed to comprehensible narrative input develop stronger intuitive fluency than those relying only on decontextualized drills. The brain begins predicting language patterns more efficiently when it understands the story flow. Prediction, by the way, is a huge part of fluent listening. Native speakers are not decoding every word one by one. Their brains are constantly forecasting what comes next. Story-based learning trains this exact skill. But there was another benefit I didn't fully expect. Motivation. Before Thanksgiving, some evenings felt like discipline was the only thing keeping me consistent. But once I started connecting English with real human moments, real emotions, my practice felt less like homework and more like preparation for life happening around me. That shift matters more than most people realize. Because long-term language success depends heavily on sustained engagement, not short bursts of intense effort. The learners who succeed are rarely the ones who study the hardest for 1 week. They are the ones whose brains stay curious for months and years. And stories are curiosity fuel. Still, even as my confidence was growing, something else was quietly developing in the background. Something I didn't fully recognize yet. At future gatherings. In small conversations at work. In brief moments of shared laughter. One particular connection was slowly becoming more meaningful. At first, it was subtle. Easy to overlook. But looking back now, I can see clearly. That Thanksgiving table did more than improve my English. It started a chain of moments that would eventually change my life in America in a much more personal way. Because sometimes, when you finally feel safe enough to speak, You also become open enough to connect. And that is exactly where my story was heading next. When love spoke softly. If you had asked me back then what my main goal in America was, I would have answered very clearly: improve my English, work hard, build stability. Love was not on the checklist. Not even close. But life in the United States, and honestly life anywhere, has a quiet way of rearranging your priorities when you least expect it. After that Thanksgiving dinner, something subtle began to change in my weekly routine. Not dramatically.
Not all at once.
Just small, almost invisible shifts in the rhythm of my days. I started getting invited to more casual gatherings with the same group. Nothing formal. Sometimes just coffee after work. Sometimes a relaxed weekend meal. The kind of everyday American social life that doesn't look important from the outside, but turns out to be incredibly powerful for language growth. Because here is something many English learners underestimate. Fluency grows fastest in repeated, low-pressure human interactions. Not high-stakes conversations. Not perfect presentations. Just regular, comfortable communication. And somewhere inside those normal moments, I began noticing one person more than the others. At first, it was nothing dramatic. Just small details. The way they slowed their speaking speed slightly when talking with me. Not in a patronizing way, but naturally considerate. The way they made eye contact when I was searching for words, giving me space instead of rushing to fill the silence. The way their tone carried patience without making a big deal about it. If you've ever been in a second language environment, you know how meaningful that kind of behavior is. Research in interpersonal communication shows that conversational partners who provide supportive pacing significantly reduce second language anxiety. In simple terms, when someone gives your brain time to process, your confidence grows faster. At the time, I didn't label it scientifically. I just noticed I felt more relaxed when they were around. Our conversations started small. Work topics. Weather comments. Typical American small talk. Cold morning today, huh? Yeah, winter's definitely coming. Nothing special on the surface. But something important was happening underneath. Because repetition builds familiarity. And familiarity builds comfort. Over the next few weeks, our conversations gradually became longer. I found myself speaking more naturally, sometimes even forgetting to mentally rehearse before answering. That was new. And a little surprising. One evening after work, a few of us stopped for coffee. The shop was warm, softly lit, with quiet background music. The kind of environment that lowers your nervous system without you even realizing it. At one point, the conversation shifted toward travel and cultural differences in the US. Someone asked me what had surprised me most about living in America so far. I paused, but this time, not from fear. From reflection. Then I answered slowly. Honestly, how friendly people are. I expected things to feel more distant. There was a soft laugh around the table. And then, from across the table, that familiar warm voice replied. We're glad you're here. Short sentence. Gentle tone. But something about the timing, the eye contact, the sincerity, it landed differently than casual politeness. And here is where psychology adds an interesting layer. Human brains are extremely sensitive to microsignals of belonging, subtle cues in tone, pacing, and attention that indicate social acceptance. Studies in social neuroscience show that these small signals can significantly increase feelings of emotional safety, even when the interaction itself appears ordinary. In other words, sometimes your body recognizes connection before your conscious mind fully does. Looking back now, that was probably one of those moments. From that point on, our conversations became easier, not just linguistically but emotionally. I started noticing something encouraging in my English development too. When I spoke with people who made me feel relaxed, my fluency improved noticeably. Fewer long pauses. Faster comprehension. More natural rhythm. This aligns perfectly with what language researchers call the affective filter hypothesis, the idea that emotional comfort directly impacts language performance. When anxiety drops, input processing improves. Output becomes smoother. My brain was finally experiencing this in real life. Still, I would be exaggerating if I said I immediately recognized where things were heading. At that time, I was simply grateful for something that had been missing during my earliest weeks in America: ease. But sometimes, what begins as simple conversational comfort slowly becomes something more meaningful, one shared moment at a time. And without realizing it yet, I was stepping into a new phase of my American story. One that had nothing to do with grammar drills. Nothing to do with vocabulary lists. And everything to do with connection. Because the truth is, language opens doors. But it is human warmth that invites you to walk through them. And very soon, I was about to understand just how important that difference really was. Understanding life in America. There is a quiet moment that happens after you have lived in the United States for a while. A moment when the country stops feeling like a movie set and starts feeling real. Not perfect. Not always easy. Just real life with its own rhythm, rules, and surprises. For me, that moment arrived gradually in the months after my first Thanksgiving. At the beginning of my journey, everything in America felt slightly amplified. The highways looked wider. The supermarkets looked bigger. Even casual conversations at work felt faster and more efficient than what I was used to. But over time, especially as my English listening and speaking improved, the surface differences became easier to navigate. What replaced them was something deeper, understanding how everyday life actually works in the US. If you are learning English with the dream of living or working in America, this part matters more than most people realize. Language is only one layer. Culture, workplace expectations, and family dynamics form the environment where that language lives. Let's start with work culture. One of the first things I noticed was how strongly American workplaces value clear communication and initiative. Managers often expect employees to speak up, ask questions, and share ideas, even early in their roles. At first, this was slightly uncomfortable for me. Back home, being respectful sometimes meant listening more and speaking carefully. But in many US work environments, silence can be misunderstood as disengagement. Research in cross-cultural management confirms this pattern. American professional culture generally ranks high in what experts call low power distance and individual initiative. In simple terms, people are encouraged to contribute openly, regardless of rank. Understanding this helped my English confidence in a surprising way. Instead of waiting for perfect grammar, I started focusing on clear, simple communication. Short sentences. Direct wording. Natural tone. For example, instead of mentally building long, complicated responses, I practiced practical workplace phrases like, "Just to clarify. Here's what I found. Does that sound right?" These small adjustments made daily interaction smoother and reduced the pressure to sound perfect. Outside of work, American daily life revealed another important layer: independence mixed with friendliness. Neighbors might smile and wave, but still value personal space. Co-workers might chat warmly, but keep clear time boundaries after work. At first, this balance felt slightly confusing. Was the friendliness casual politeness, or real connection? The answer I learned is often both. Social researchers describe this as friendly individualism, a pattern common in many parts of the United States. People are generally approachable and kind in everyday interactions, but deeper relationships tend to develop gradually through consistent shared experiences. That realization helped me adjust my expectations. Instead of rushing connection, I focused on showing up consistently, at work, at small gatherings, at casual coffee meetups. And slowly, something encouraging happened. Conversations became easier. Invitations became more natural. And that one relationship that had quietly started forming after Thanksgiving continued to grow. By now, our interactions felt comfortable enough that I no longer mentally translated every sentence before speaking. My brain was beginning to process English more directly, a major milestone in second language development known as reduced translation dependency. If you are on your English journey right now, reaching this stage can feel subtle but powerful. You may notice you respond faster in conversations. You catch humor more easily. You think less about grammar in real time. That was happening to me, slowly but clearly. But life in America was not only about language and work. It was also about understanding systems, things like healthcare scheduling, holiday planning, even tax paperwork. These practical realities are rarely shown in movies, but they shape daily experience in the US. At times, navigating these systems still felt overwhelming. And this is where emotional support, the human side of belonging, became more important than I expected. Because during stressful weeks, when paperwork piled up or work deadlines felt tight, having someone check in with a simple, "How are you holding up?" made a noticeable difference. Research in adjustment psychology shows that perceived social support significantly improves immigrant adaptation and reduces long-term stress levels. In plain terms, feeling that someone notices you matters more than many people think. Looking back, this period of my life was a turning point. My English was improving. My understanding of American life was deepening. My social world was slowly expanding. From the outside, everything looked stable. But what I didn't fully realize yet was this: growth phases often come right before new emotional challenges. Because just as I was starting to feel more settled, more confident, life was quietly preparing the next test in my journey. And this time, it wouldn't just be about language. It would be about trust, expectations, and the kind of relationship that forces you to grow whether you feel ready or not. Looking back now, I can say this with complete honesty. Learning English opened the door. But living in America, really living, was about to test everything that walked through it. When marriage faced its first test. There is a moment in every love story that no one posts about on social media.
Not the smiling photos.
Not the cozy holiday scenes. I mean the quiet, uncomfortable moment when two people realize that caring about each other and understanding each other are not always the same thing. For me, that moment came after life in America had already started to feel more stable. By this time, my English had improved noticeably. I was participating confidently at work. Daily conversations felt smoother. Even casual jokes didn't fly over my head the way they used to. From the outside, everything looked like a success story. But real life, especially real relationships, has a way of testing you right when you start feeling comfortable. The relationship that had grown so naturally after that first Thanksgiving had continued to deepen over the following months. More shared meals. More relaxed conversations. More small moments that slowly built trust. Eventually, what had started as easy companionship became something more serious, something that moved toward long-term commitment and marriage. And that's when the real learning began. Because here is something many people don't talk about enough. Cross-cultural relationships require double the communication clarity. Not because anyone is doing something wrong, but because two different cultural operating systems are trying to sync in real time. At first, things felt smooth. We communicated openly. We supported each other. We laughed easily. But then came the first real misunderstanding. It wasn't dramatic. No raised voices. No big argument scene. Just a quiet moment one evening after a long workday. I had been unusually quiet, mentally tired from juggling work pressure and daily life adjustments. When asked if everything was okay, I gave what I thought was a reassuring answer. Yeah, I'm fine. Simple. Polite. Efficient. But something in the room shifted. Later, in a calm but honest conversation, I learned an important cultural and emotional lesson. In many American communication styles, especially in close relationships, "I'm fine" can sometimes be interpreted as emotional distance rather than reassurance. That surprised me. Because in my earlier communication habits, keeping concerns to myself often felt respectful and self-managing. But here, transparency was often interpreted as trust-building. This moment reflects what intercultural psychologists call high-context versus low-context communication differences. In lower-context cultures like the United States, people often rely more on explicit verbal expression to understand emotional states. If something is wrong, saying it clearly is usually valued more than quietly managing it alone. Understanding this changed how I approached both English and relationships. Because suddenly, language wasn't just about vocabulary accuracy. It was about emotional clarity. Over the next few weeks, we had several honest conversations. Not confrontational, just real. I practiced expressing thoughts more directly. "I'm a little overwhelmed today. I just need a bit of quiet time. Work has been stressful this week. Something remarkable happened." Not only did our communication improve, my spoken English confidence improved too. Why? Because emotionally meaningful communication creates stronger neural engagement. Studies in effective linguistics show that when language carries personal meaning, fluency pathways strengthen more rapidly than during purely mechanical practice. In everyday terms, when your words matter, your brain learns faster. Of course, growth was not perfectly smooth. There were still moments when my processing lag returned under stress. Still times when I searched for the right phrase longer than I wanted. Still evenings when cultural differences required extra patience on both sides. But something important had shifted since my early weeks in America. Back then, uncertainty made me withdraw. Now, uncertainty pushed me to communicate more clearly. And that difference changed everything. One evening, after a particularly honest conversation about future plans, I remember hearing words that stayed with me in a completely different way than anything at that first Thanksgiving table. Soft voice. Direct eye contact. We'll figure it out together. Not perfect English. Not complicated grammar. Just real partnership language. And in that moment, I understood something that every English learner, and honestly every human, eventually discovers. Fluency is not just the ability to speak smoothly. It is the courage to stay in the conversation when things feel uncertain. Looking back now, that first real relationship challenge in America didn't weaken our connection. It strengthened it. Because it forced me to grow beyond safe practice sentences, beyond comfortable listening routines, into something far more powerful. Real communication under real emotional conditions. And without realizing it yet, we were moving closer to a moment that would bring my entire American journey, language, belonging, love, and Thanksgiving, quietly full circle. The seat that was always saved. If you had asked me during my first lonely week in America what I feared most, I probably would have said something practical. Maybe fast English conversations, maybe workplace pressure, maybe cultural misunderstandings. But looking back now, I can see the deeper fear was much simpler. I was afraid of not belonging anywhere. Not fully back home. Not fully in the United States. Just somewhere in between. And for a long time, that quiet uncertainty followed me like background noise. But life has a strange way of answering old questions when you least expect it. About a year after my very first Thanksgiving in America, the holiday season came around again. The air turned cold in that familiar sharp American way. Grocery stores filled with pumpkin displays and early holiday music. At work, the same question started floating around again. What are you doing for Thanksgiving? This time, something inside me felt different. Not perfect. Not completely settled. But different. Because over the past year, so much had quietly changed. My English had become more natural. My daily life felt more predictable. And the relationship that had grown so gently after that first invitation had become a steady, meaningful part of my world. Still, when the actual Thanksgiving day arrived, I felt a small, familiar nervous energy in my chest as we drove to the family gathering. Not anxiety exactly, more like awareness. Because deep down, part of me still remembered that first year. The uncertainty. The hesitation. The question that had once felt so heavy. Who truly keeps a seat for you? When we walked into the house, the warmth hit me first, not just the temperature, but the emotional atmosphere.
Familiar voices.
Easy laughter. The soft background rhythm of a family that had welcomed me long before I fully understood what that meant. And then I saw it. The table. Set carefully, just like the year before. But this time, something was different. My name, written neatly on a small place card, sat quietly beside one of the plates. For a second, my brain didn't fully process what I was seeing. Then it did. And something in my chest softened in a way that is hard to describe if you've never experienced it. Because that small detail, that simple name card, carried enormous emotional weight. In social psychology, there is a concept called symbolic belonging markers. These are small, visible signals that communicate inclusion in a group, things like name placements, personal invitations, or inside references. Research shows these markers significantly increase feelings of long-term social integration. In plain words, small gestures can tell your nervous system, you are not outside anymore. Standing there in that warm American dining room, I felt the full truth of something I had been slowly learning all year. Belonging rarely arrives in one dramatic moment. It builds quietly. Conversation by conversation. Meal by meal. Year by year. Dinner that evening felt completely different from my first Thanksgiving. Not because my English had suddenly become perfect. It hadn't. Not because every cultural difference had disappeared. They hadn't. But because my nervous system was no longer in constant alert mode. I was participating naturally. Laughing at the right moments. Jumping into conversations without mentally rehearsing every sentence first. Even my listening felt smoother, more automatic. Exactly what second language researchers describe as increased automaticity through emotional safety. At one point during dinner, someone across the table smiled and asked casually, "Hard to believe it's already been a year, right?" I nodded, smiling back. Yeah, it really is. But inside, I was thinking something much deeper. Because a year earlier, I had sat at a similar table wondering if I truly belonged in this country, in this culture, in this language. Now, without any dramatic announcement, the answer was quietly sitting in front of me. Not in perfect grammar. Not in flawless pronunciation. But in something far more powerful. Consistency. Connection. And a chair that was no longer temporary. Later that evening, as plates were being cleared and conversations softened into that comfortable post-dinner calm, I caught a quiet moment of eye contact across the room, the same warm presence that had first made space for me months earlier. No big speech. Just a gentle smile. And in that moment, I understood something that every English learner, every newcomer, every person searching for their place in the world eventually discovers. The question is not how fast you learn. The question is whether you stay long enough, and open enough, to notice who has been quietly keeping a seat for you all along. And my story wasn't finished yet. Because what happened next would finally bring everything, the language journey, the relationship, the years of quiet adjustment, to the warm, unexpected conclusion I never could have planned. The family I didn't expect. If you had met me during my first cold week in America, standing in that airport with one suitcase and one fragile sentence of confidence, you probably would not have predicted how this story would end. Honestly, neither would I. Because back then, my goals were simple and practical. Improve my English, keep my job stable, learn how to navigate daily life in the United States. I wasn't thinking about emotional milestones. I wasn't thinking about belonging. And I definitely wasn't thinking about how one Thanksgiving invitation would quietly reshape my entire American journey. But life rarely follows the clean outline we imagine. In the months after that second Thanksgiving, the one with my name card waiting at the table, something inside me finally settled in a way I hadn't experienced before. Not because every challenge disappeared. Life in America still required constant learning. Work still had busy seasons. Cultural differences still appeared in small, surprising ways. The difference was internal. For the first time since arriving in the US, I no longer felt like I was standing just outside the room. I was part of the conversation. I was part of the routine. And slowly but unmistakably, I was part of the family. Now, let me be very clear about something important for anyone watching this real English story practice video to improve your listening and speaking. My English did not become perfect. I still occasionally search for the right word. I still sometimes notice small grammar slips. I still have moments when fast group conversations require extra focus. And that is completely normal. Second language research consistently shows that even highly functional bilingual speakers maintain small areas of variability in spontaneous speech. Fluency is not perfection. It is comfortable participation under real conditions. What changed most was not my vocabulary size. It was my nervous system. Because over time, through repeated safe conversations, shared meals, honest relationship moments, my brain stopped treating English interactions as potential threats. The amygdala response that once slowed my processing had gradually quieted. In practical terms, this meant I spoke more freely. I listened more efficiently. I recovered faster from small mistakes. And perhaps most importantly, I stopped measuring every sentence while I was still inside the conversation. That shift is what many language experts describe as functional fluency. The point where communication flows naturally enough that connection becomes the focus instead of self-monitoring. Looking back now, the path that brought me here was surprisingly human. It wasn't one perfect study plan. It wasn't one magical method. It was a series of small, consistent moments. Showing up to conversations even when I felt unsure. Listening to real English stories that trained my brain for natural rhythm. Allowing relationships to develop at their own pace. Learning to express emotions clearly, not just grammatically. And yes, accepting one simple Thanksgiving invitation when part of me wanted to stay safely at home. Today, when Thanksgiving season comes around in the United States, the holiday feels completely different from that first year. The cold air still arrives. The grocery stores still overflow with pumpkin displays. The familiar question still floats through workplaces and social circles. What are you doing for Thanksgiving? But now, my answer comes easily. Not rushed. Not uncertain. Just calm. I'm spending it with family. Every time I say that sentence, a small part of me still remembers the version of myself who once stood quietly on the outside, wondering if that word family would ever feel natural in this new country. If you are watching this right now while feeling stuck in your English journey, or uncertain about your place in a new environment, I want you to hear this clearly. Progress is often quieter than you expect. Confidence builds in layers. Belonging grows through repetition, not sudden breakthroughs. Keep listening. Keep speaking. Keep showing up, even when your sentences feel imperfect. Because sometimes the moment that changes everything does not arrive with perfect grammar or perfect timing. Sometimes it arrives with a warm table, a simple invitation, and a seat that has been waiting for you longer than you realized. And if this story connected with you, if it made your English practice feel just a little more human, then you are already moving in the right direction. What if the moment that changes your English is not the day you memorize more words, but the day you finally feel you belong? Tonight, somewhere in the United States, another newcomer is sitting quietly at a table, smiling politely, translating every sentence in their head, just like I once did. Maybe that person is you. Maybe you're still wondering if your English is good enough, if your accent is too strong, or if there will ever be a place where you can speak freely without overthinking every word. Here is the truth most language courses never tell you. Fluency doesn't begin in your mouth. It begins the moment your fear gets smaller than your courage. My first Thanksgiving did not magically fix my English. It did something more powerful. It gave me proof that connection comes before perfection. And once your brain feels safe, your listening becomes sharper, your speaking becomes smoother, and your confidence grows faster than you expect. So if you're still on this journey, still practicing, still doubting, still trying, don't stop now. You might be much closer to your breakthrough moment than you think. And here's a quiet question to leave in your mind tonight. Who is already saving a seat for you that you haven't noticed yet? If this real English story helped you relax, listen better, or feel a little more motivated to keep going, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This channel is where we practice real English through emotional stories, slow and clear, designed especially for learners who want natural confidence, not textbook perfection. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next story that might change the way you hear English forever.